Children's church. So if you are 5th grade and under, want to go on to children's church, okay. You already know what I'm going to tell you. Yeah. Kate just looks at me. He knows what's coming. He says, I'll be good. At least you know what I'm about to say. Whenever I was in law enforcement, I had a sergeant, and this sergeant, we did what he said because he was the sergeant. Now, the reason, y'all know what I'm talking about. Y'all have had those guys. The reason that we did what he said was because he's the sergeant. Okay. Now, on the same shift, I had a corporal. Now, sergeant is a higher rank than a corporal. In fact, the corporal is just, in law enforcement, the corporal was just one rank above a patrolman. Okay? And a sergeant, we did what he said because he was the sergeant. We had to. We had a corporal. We did what this guy said because of him. We did what this guy, this corporal, we'd have followed him into any situation. We followed him, we respected him. And the reason being, and if we got in a bad situation and the sergeant told us to do one thing and the corporal told us to do something else, we were going to do what the corporal said. But we trusted that corporal. And the reason being is because you'd ask the sergeant something, or it'd be time for the sergeant to make a decision, and he would do this. He'd go, let me call the lieutenant. When it's time for the corporal to make a decision, he said, this is what we're going to do. And sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad. Sometimes it was right, sometimes it was wrong. But he made a decision. He was confident. Our sergeant wasn't confident. Our corporal was confident. And because of this confidence, it invoked us to feel confident in him, to follow him. I'm going to tell you, confidence is a powerful thing. Young men, you want young ladies to like you? Confidence. Older men, you want to be respected. You want to, or older men, older ladies, anybody really. You want to be respected. You want people to look up to you. You want people to listen when you speak. Confidence. Confidence is important. And even in our Christianity, confidence is important. Being confident in what we believe. Being confident in where we're going. And I'm going to tell you, as Christians should be the most confident people on the planet. Because just as Brother Jimmy's song said, we're winners either way. We're winners either way. And I asked Brother Jimmy to play that song because it lines up so good with what Paul is saying here in our sermon this morning. And that's going to be in Philippians chapter 1. So if you want to go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Philippians chapter 1, we are continuing our series of all things. It's a walkthrough. Of the book of Philippians, and we are still in Philippians chapter 1. We're kind of in the third section of Philippians chapter 1, and the first section of Philippians chapter 1 is an introduction, and this is Paul introducing himself and saying who he's writing to, and some words of encouragement to the Philippian church, and a prayer for the Philippian church. The second section that we talked about in the second sermon, Paul addresses kind of the elephant in the room, that he is in prison. And Paul, in the second section of the book of Philippians, he addresses all of the Philippians' concerns about him being in prison and him being in jail. And the way that he addresses it in that section is saying, listen, yes, I'm locked up. I'm in jail. Things are bad for me. But I'm not concerned about me. I'm not concerned about what I'm going through. My concern is that the gospel of Jesus Christ is still being spread. It's still being preached. And you know what? As long as the gospel is still being preached, what happens to me is what happens to me. And so now in this third section of Philippians chapter 1, Paul changes gears, and now he starts talking more about himself and how he is compartmentalizing being in prison and how he is dealing with being in prison. And so let's read together. We're going to read this whole section all at once, and then we're going to come back to kind of what I feel like are key points. And so we're going to start in verse 19. So Philippians chapter 1, starting in verse 19. For I know that this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayers and the supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. Man, I'm going to read that again because we're going to be coming back to that time and time again. I know this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayer and the supply of Jesus Christ. Supply of the Spirit of Jesus Christ. According to my earnest expectations and the hope in nothing I shall be ashamed. But with all boldness, as always, so now also Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by my life or by my death. For to me to live is Christ, and die is gain. But if I shall live in the flesh, this will mean fruit of my labor. Yet what I shall choose I cannot tell, for I am hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to remain in the flesh is more needful for you. And being confident of this, I know that I shall remain and continue with you for all your progress and joy in faith, that your rejoicing for me may be abundant in Jesus Christ by my coming to you again. Paul's saying there, and one of the kind of the key things that Paul says there that is repeated that we remember from this, he says, for me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. Basically what Paul is saying here is exactly what Brother Jimmy's song said. He says, I'm a winner either way. Whether if I live, I continue ministering. If I die, I'm going home to be with Jesus. And Paul here in prison, locked up, is being able to have this incredible confidence of, you know what? I know this is going to work out for my deliverance. That's the very first thing that he says. He says, I know this is going to work out for my deliverance. Because no matter what life throws at me, I'm a winner either way. And that's the amazing confidence that we have as Christians. That's the amazing confidence that we have as born-again Christ followers, disciples of Christ, is that we are winners either way. That no matter what life throws at us, it's going to, one way or another, it's going to work out. We are the only religion that has this. Any other religion, it's, maybe, hopefully, if I'm good enough. For us, we can know. John writes in 1 John, he says, I'm writing you these things so that you can know that you're saved. And that's the confidence that we have. The confidence that we have going forth in life. To know that all this is going to work out for our deliverance. So I don't know what you're going through this morning. I know pretty much in 2020, we're all going through something. We are all beat up. We are all broken. We are all beat down coming at the end of 2020. We're all going through something, but I want you to understand, for all of us, no matter what you're going through, no matter what life is thrown at you, no matter what heartache, hardship that you're going through, we can be confident that it's going to work out for our deliverance. One way or another. One way or another, it's going to work out for our deliverance. It might not be in this life. We might go through this whole life beat down, struggling, pain, suffering. You know, that's one of the lies of this new gospel in America, is that Christians are promised this great life, and as long as you're living a good Christian life, that everything's going to be hunky-dory, everything's going to be unicorn and rainbows your whole Christian life. And I'm going to tell you, church, that is nowhere in the Bible where we promise that. And I'm going to tell you, for years and years and years, Christians have faced persecution. Christians have faced hard times. And so don't get discouraged just because you start going through some hard times. Don't get discouraged just because you're facing that storm. And have the confidence to know that this too is going to work out for your deliverance. One way or another. One way or another. Second thing I want to point out about this is 21st century Christians, when we read this, and we're reading Paul saying, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain, and one way or another, this is going to work out for my deliverance. When we read this as 21st century Christians, what we plug in there is, and I'm not trying to be insensitive to anybody's situation, but what we plug in there is, if I don't survive the cancer. If I don't survive this sickness, I'm going home to be with my Savior. That's the way we plug it in. That's the way we have to plug it in. If I die from this heart attack, I'm going to go home and I'm going to be a winner either way. I'm either going to live or I'm going to die, but I'm going to be a winner either way. This too is going to work out for my deliverance. We typically plug it in with as 21st century Christians, we typically plug this in as a sickness, or as a disease, or maybe a financial crisis that we have found ourselves in, that God's going to work this out, and it's all going to work out in the end, and God's going to take care of it for us. Well, when Paul is writing this, and Paul is saying to live for Christ and to die is gain, he's not plugging it in of, am I going to survive cancer? He's not plugging it in as, am I going to survive this heart attack, or am I going to survive this financial ruin? He is plugging it in of, am I going to give my life for Christ? Am I going to be murdered for what I believe? And he is writing this to the Philippian church, who is also in that similar situation of Philippi. As we talked about in the very first sermon in this series, Philippi is a hotbed of Roman nationalism. And if anywhere Christians are going to be persecuted, and anywhere Christians are going to be forced to bow the knee to Caesar and to worship Caesar, it's going to be in a place like Philippi. And this was a very real present thought in the mindsets of the Philippian church. And I'm going to tell you, as 21st century Christians, as we're getting ready for church, our Sunday morning routine and getting ready for church, maybe a lot of things are going through our heads, and maybe we're thinking about things, I'm going to church Sunday, and man, I hope the sermon's good. I hope that preacher don't preach too long. I hope we can beat the Methodists to the buffet bar down there. I hope they sing my favorite song. I hope they sing out the hymn book, and they don't sing out they don't do that modern worship stuff, or vice versa. I hope we can start doing some of that modern stuff and not all that old fogey hymn book stuff. And these are some of the things that as 21st century Christians, and we're getting ready for church, these are some of the things that we might be thinking about as we're getting ready for church. But I'm going to tell you, in the first century, as they're getting ready for church, as they're getting ready to gather together, stuff like that's the last thing on their minds. In the first century, they're thinking, it's today the day. It's today the day. We're going to have a Roman centurion come through those doors and make us choose between bowing the knee to Caesar and worshiping Caesar or worshiping God. It's today the day I'm going to give my life for what I believe. It's today the day I'm going to have to choose between taking a stand for Jesus Christ or being crucified or being burned alive, being fed to lions, being beheaded. And I know that sounds extreme, but that's what they did to Christians. That was the thought process. That was the fate of the first century Christian. And so when Paul is saying, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain, he's not talking about a heart attack or he's talking about cancer. He's talking about brutal execution. Dying for what he believes. You want to know the difference between the first century church and the 21st century church? It's the first century Christians were ready to give their life for what they believed. When Paul says, confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, it means something totally different in the first century than what it means today. Because in the first century, confessing Jesus Christ with your mouth could very well be a death sentence. Those Christians were ready to die for what they believed. Now, are we ready to die for what we believe? That's a hard thing to say. And I'm going to throw this out there. I believe that most modern Christians are not ready to die for what they believe. And where do I make this stance? How can you die for something if you're not willing to live for it? If a person refuses to actually live for something and live for something out, what makes us think they'll die for something, for the same thing? My challenge. I want us to be comforted by this. And I want us to have the confidence that no matter what comes our way, no matter what disease, no matter what hardship, no matter what it is that comes our way, I want us to have the confidence to know that this too will work out for our deliverance. But I also want you to, in your mind, I want you to keep the mindset of that first century Christian of if it comes down to it, and I don't know how or when or what the circumstances would be, but if it came down to it, would I be willing to lay down my life, give my life for what I believe? We don't have to think about that in America. But maybe we should. Maybe we should put ourselves in that thought process from time to time. Could I? Would I? Lay down my life for what I believe. Now, you might be hearing this and going, okay, this confidence stuff is great, Trey. This confidence stuff is great, Pastor Trey. But that was Paul. That was Paul the Apostle, man. He was awesome. Man, he went on these missionary journeys and he wrote most of the New Testament. And this guy was Paul the Apostle. So, of course, he's confident. Of course, he can say things like, for me to live as Christ and to die as gain. He's Paul the Apostle. He feels confident, right? And you know what? I would love to have that kind of confidence, but I don't feel confidence. I don't always feel confident. You know, most of the time, I don't feel confident. Most of the time, I feel beat down. Most of the time, I feel broke down. So how can I have that kind of confidence when I feel that way? Well, I want to challenge that thought process that Paul felt confident. And let's read on and let's see what else. Let's reread some things that he says here. So immediately after he makes this awesome statement, this statement that is repeated so many times in verse 21, for me to live as Christ and to die as gain. And you hear that and you go, oh man, this guy's solid, boy. This guy's ready to lay it down. Live as Christ, die as gain, man. That's awesome. It just rolls off the tongue, right? You think this guy, man, he's so confident and he's on top of it and he's ready to roll and he's just, man, this is like the coach giving a pep talk to the team or whatnot at halftime in the sports movie when they're losing, they miraculously start winning. Something like that. But then listen to what he starts saying in verse 22 and on down. He says, but if I live on in the flesh, This will mean that the fruit of my labor, yet what I shall choose I cannot tell. Listen to this, y'all. For I'm hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart, to be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to remain in the flesh is more needful to you. Paul's saying to depart and to go on with Christ would be far better for me. In essence, this guy's saying, I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to throw in the towel. I'm ready for this to be over with. I'm ready for Christ to call me home. I'm ready to go. And he says that would be far better. I'm hard pressed. He's saying I'm hard pressed in my decision whether I want to just die or I want to continue on living. I'm going to tell you, anybody who is in a healthy state of mind mentally, a healthy emotional state of mind, they're not having a hard time deciding whether or not they want to live or die. Paul's saying here, I am struggling with the decision if I even want to continue living or if I want to die. I'm hard pressed between the two. It's his exact words. Paul's saying, man, I want to go home. That's not the words of somebody who is exuding confidence. That is not the words of a man who feels confident. Some words of a man who is broken. That's the words of a man or a woman who is emotionally broken, who is spiritually in a way broken, who is physically broken, who is just saying, you know what, I don't even know if I want to continue this fight. And I'd just soon go home and be with Jesus. Paul didn't feel confident. But he was confident. He wasn't confident in the way that he felt. He was confident in what he knew. He was confident in what he believed. He was confident in what Jesus Christ had done for him on the cross. And so even when he didn't feel confident, even when he was, you know what, I'm ready to throw in the towel. I'm ready to be done with all this. I can't even make up a decision in my own heart if I want to live or if I want to die. He was still confident. And he says, you know what? At the end of the section, he says, I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep pressing on. And he says, because I have you. I have you. I have the Philippian church. It is far more beneficial for me to be alive, to minister to you. Paul is going, and I believe that in those deepest, darkest times, in those jail cells that Paul's experiencing, and he's thinking, he's like, God, I don't even want to go, keep going anymore. But then he thinks of the church, the Philippi church, and he goes, they need me. He thinks of the Thessalonians, he thinks of the Galatians. I would say he thinks of the Corinthians, but more than likely when he thought of the Corinthians, he was like, Jesus, take me now. I'm going to have to write another letter to those guys. But he thinks of Timothy. He thinks of Titus and Philemon. He thinks of all those churches. Those churches need him. And you know who else needed him that he had no clue was ever going to need him? The church at Lyerly. The church at Somerville. The church in Pembroke, Georgia. Y'all don't even know where that's at. You know, he had no clue that those words that he's penning, when he's trying to decide if, is there even anything else left for me in this life? That the very words that he was penning was going to be canonized into the Bible, that generations and generations and generations of Christians would be reading those words and then being encouraged through those words. He had no clue. So I'm going to tell you this, and I say this a lot, and I'm going to say it again. If you're still drawing breath, God still has a plan and a purpose for you. If God has given you another breath, that is a breath that He desires for you to honor Him with. If you are still drawing breath, God still has a plan for you. And you can have confidence in that. Your confidence comes not in the way that you feel, but in what Jesus Christ has done for you. And the promise of His glory. And the promise of His resurrection. And the promise of His life. That is where our confidence is. Not in ourselves, not in what's going on, not in how we feel. Our confidence is with Him. And I hope this morning that whatever you're going through, you approach it with the confidence of Christ, the confidence that is found in Christ. Lord, we come before you